Yes, they sold around 150 Nintendo Switch units, and it's probably going to be an all-time greatest selling console. If you compare that to the Steam Deck, which is estimated to have sold around 4 to 5 million units by now, that is absolutely massive. So Nintendo has shown that a large segment of the gaming population is perfectly content with things as they are. In fact, I doubt that any of the things that I talk about in this video would have made that 150 million number 150 million number higher. There we go. But here are some things that I think that Nintendo did get wrong in the past, and what I think that they need to get right this time by learning from others. But before we get there, I want to talk about what I don't think will actually matter, and that's power. This is the thing that I see most in my little corner of the internet. People are concerned with how powerful the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be, and I can understand why. You look at games like Mortal Kombat 1 on the Switch, and it's an absolute disaster. Third parties, they can't ignore the Switch because there's 150 million units of them, but there's just they also struggle to make games run well on it, especially when these are games ported from other systems. Even Nintendo, who I think are the kings of optimizing their games to run on very low-powered hardware, some of their games do struggle to be running at decent frame rates on the 8-year-old handheld. One example is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. That game would sometimes drop down to 20 frames per second, but I've got a secret to tell you. The vast majority of people playing games on the original Nintendo Switch, they just don't care. Hell, I finished Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and I absolutely love that game, frame dips and all. Nintendo has shown over and over that the bigger number, better crowd is not the be-all, end-all of what makes a game good. And with the PC handheld market growing, even PC people are finally starting to see that sometimes you have to make sacrifices in order to play your games on the go. And when you combine that with the fact that Nintendo often chooses art styles that look really good without breaking the power budget bank, and then they hold up over time, I think that if the Switch 2 is just a little bit more powerful than the Switch 1, most of the people who are interested in buying one will be just fine with it. Let's talk about the screen. I do think that this will matter for a lot of people, but not enough people to make a difference. I personally hope that the Switch 2 will be an OLED screen, but I also know that Nintendo likes to do incremental upgrades throughout the hardware lifecycle. And if they give us everything that we want now, then what would they be able to sell us later on other than different colors? So I fully expect the Switch 2 to follow the Switch 1 path, with a Switch 2 Lite coming in roughly 2 years, and then a couple years after that, a Switch 2 OLED with smaller bezels. OLED would be nice at launch, but I don't think that the average consumer even knows what OLED is. It's simply a bunch of letters on a box for a system that plays the games that they want to play. Nintendo had a hard time with their Joy-Cons and Joy-Con drift in the gaming news circles. Although, again, I think that the average consumer doesn't really watch that stuff, but the average consumer was absolutely affected by it. My sons eventually stopped working, as did mine. I have a friend who had to have his Joy-Cons replaced multiple times, and I think that that's something Nintendo wants to avoid this time around. And Nintendo, in their unveiling video, they made a point to focus on the sticks, and nothing that they do in these videos is by accident. I'm sure that it goes through multiple teams of people at Nintendo having endless meeting after meeting on exactly how long that joystick was swirling around on screen, and then to go from that image of the stick to the image of the Joy-Cons, Tokyo drifting around the table like a set of race cars, or I guess in this case it would be called Kyoto drifting. It absolutely reminds everyone of the drift problem that you had the first time around. So I fully anticipate that on April 4th, Nintendo will say that these joysticks have Hall effect, which are much less prone to drift, although they might leave off saying drift and just say that they're better and leave it at that. One thing Nintendo has forever been bad at is online multiplayer. Pretty much anything to do with the internet, Nintendo is very bad at. Once the Xbox and PlayStation networks required a fee for using any online multiplayer stuff, people started giving Nintendo a pass because it's free. It's not like I'm paying for it. Then, about a year after Nintendo Switch launched, they then launched their own online service, Nintendo Switch Online, which gave you access to online servers. Up until then, it was free. And, okay, so now that we're paying for it, it's going to be better, right? Right? No. Online games were still a stuttery mess from Nintendo, mostly because they were using peer-to-peer networking, and the Switch is a handheld device. You're playing against some Yahoo in their backyard with half a bar of Wi-Fi, and every time they get lag, so do you. I'm sure that Nintendo will be using old Wi-Fi standards in order to keep costs down on the hardware, but if they do, I hope that they finally ditch peer-to-peer games and start giving us servers to play on, though I don't anticipate that happening. And here's the reason why. We're backwards compatible. And so if Nintendo's going to do that, then it's going to also affect all of the stuff on the Nintendo Switch 1. And I just don't see them going back and doing that after being so successful with the Switch. Next up, let me see playtime. I want to see my friends' playtime if they choose to share it. And if they did, this worked. Nintendo did it before. It worked fantastically well on the Wii U. I could see exactly how many hours or minutes I had played a game. But then on the Switch, it was more like played more than 5 hours or some nonsense like that. Put achievements in the games with the option to turn off notification for achievements, because personally, I don't really care about them, but I am absolutely aware that I am in the minority here, and tons of people love achievements. They want to be able to check and see how they're stacking up against their friends. And speaking of friends, let us make friends groups that we can join every time that we log in. Again, Nintendo has always been the worst at this, but they always seem to get a pass. The Switch social features are pretty anemic, practically non-existent. Adding people as friends is almost pointless, as most of the time there's no way to invite them into a game without going into the game, opening a room, and then telling them a code or something like that. I should just be able to pick a friend, press a button, and request to join them or request them to join me. And if they're already in a game, they should put me in a queue so that I can wait and watch them play while I'm waiting for a slot to open up. And then when somebody leaves, I take up that slot and I'm playing with my friend, and I'm able to see what my friends are actually doing and invite them to a party like you can on Xbox or PlayStation with voice chat. Though I will point out that I doubt we're getting voice chat on Switch 2. I did see people saying that they figure there will be a microphone in the Switch 2, but even if there is, I'm sure it's for yelling at your Nintendo or blowing on the screen for something. Because you know what I didn't see in the close-up renders of the Joy-Cons? I didn't see a headphone port on them. I saw one on the console itself, but then you dock the system and now you don't have a headphone port or a microphone. And this is something you would probably need if you're not going to use Nintendo's ridiculous phone app, which I fully anticipate that we are going to be stuck with yet again. I'd love it if Nintendo would embrace Discord like Microsoft and Sony have with Xbox and PlayStation. It's really, really good that way. It's so much better, but I absolutely don't think that they will. I think that we will be on our phones, and I bet that Nintendo will sell a pair of Bluetooth headphones this time around instead of a wired set that will connect to your Switch 2 and your phone simultaneously, kind of like how Sony did, or they will license that ability to third-party manufacturers so they can make money off each unit sold. Moving on to the eShop. The eShop is kind of a nightmare to navigate. They need to find some way to make it faster. They also need to rein in some of the shenanigans that certain devs are getting away with. There are far too many shovelware games or asset flips trying to game the system by fluctuating the price of their games in order to get into certain lists. On top of that, the store is painfully slow, and the longer that you browse the store, the slower that it gets. Then, if you look at something and you're like, okay, I don't want that, and then you back out, sometimes the store will scroll you all the way up to the top, and then you have to scroll back down to where you were. Eventually, I just gave up and started buying games through Nintendo's website instead, which, I have to be honest, I know that this video is about what Nintendo could learn from, other manufacturers, but I do the exact same thing on the Steam Deck because the store on the Steam Deck is kind of a nightmare and on that handheld as well. It's much easier just to log into Steam as a website and then buy the game and then download it later. I don't expect that Nintendo is going to fix the eShop, especially because the Switch 2 is backwards compatible and the eShop is just fine for Nintendo as far as they're concerned. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And yes, I know it's broken for us, but it isn't broken for Nintendo, and they're still raking in the cash. Hopefully that makes sense. Back to hardware. I really hope Nintendo followed USB charging standards so third-party docks can be compatible. When the Switch first came out, it ran into issues where third-party docks were allegedly bricking consoles. Some people determined that this was because Nintendo didn't follow USB charging standards. I don't know if those people were right or not, because that's well outside of my wheelhouse, but the results are what matter. Plus, you can't just hook up your Nintendo Switch to a USB-C to HDMI cord like you can with PC handhelds when traveling, and I would like to not bring the dock if I'm traveling, especially now that we have 2 USB ports on it, so you could, in theory, charge the dock on one of those videos, or on one of those ports, and then output video on the other one at the same time. But I'm skeptical that Nintendo will do this. What's even more annoying is that the dock was always out of stock. So if you wanted to buy an extra dock so that you could move from TV to TV, you had to battle a bunch of other people trying to order it whenever they did show up in stock. Moving on from the dock to storage, only Nintendo seems to understand that storage has limitations. Third-party devs are content to fill up every bit of storage that you had. And the original Switch shipped with a ridiculous 32 gigs of storage, which I have to admit at the time I said was fine. Of course, I wanted more, but keeping the cost down and then giving people the ability to upgrade their Switch via SD card worked just fine. The only issue was that some games you could go to a store and buy, and then you would get home and then you would have to download huge patches because the carts were small and publishers were being cheap and they didn't want to cut into profits by buying carts with bigger storage that could fit their whole game. So you get home and then you had to download your physical game that you just bought, and you can't because you don't have enough room on your Nintendo Switch. Steam Deck had a minimum of 64 when it launched, which also was too low, but they also made it so that you could just open it up and upgrade. That's absolutely something that Nintendo won't be doing. I think 128 is about the bare minimum that I would think is acceptable today. Lower than that, and you're running the risk of frustrating people. Next up, this isn't just for Nintendo, by the way. This is for all the console manufacturers. Steam family sharing. It's awesome. If you are in the same family group and you're in the same region, you can share your entire library as long as you aren't playing the same game at the same time. Nintendo has this stupid thing where you have to set one console as the primary console and another one as a secondary console. I'm not going to get into it. It's a whole ordeal and it's dumb. Of course, Nintendo Switch consoles aren't always online because they're portable, so they have to have some way to verify that both me and my wife, for example, aren't playing the same copy of the same game at the same time. And I don't know what that solution is, but when Steam family members are online, it's stupidly simple to just launch games and you just don't even have to think about it. Hell, it even shows in the interface how many copies your Steam family has access to. I said in my video about this dummy that was sent to me that I was really disappointed that these are these are digital triggers, not analog triggers. I really hope that I'm wrong about that. It's crazy to me to think that analog triggers are something we won't be getting again with the Switch 2, but Nintendo is going to Nintendo. You know what I mean? I was also really disappointed to see that the Switch doesn't have any buttons on the back of the Joy-Cons for back paddles. Admittedly, I don't know how well that would work on, a controller that small, but I do hope that at least Nintendo ships a new Pro controller for the system that has at least 2 buttons on the back. I've been using that feature a ton on the Steam Deck and on my DualSense Edge controller, and it's awesome. Of course, I'm sure there will be loads of third-party hardware that will fill this gap, but I do prefer to buy first-party stuff. Speaking of first and third-party stuff, there are a ton of accessories for the Nintendo Switch, and not all of them will be compatible with the new system, but I really hope controllers and Joy-Cons are compatible with the new system. Obviously, the connector is different. It's magnetic this time around, so you'll need other ways to charge them. But that's a lot of e-waste if they aren't compatible wirelessly, but I don't think that they will be. On a recent episode of the Nerd Nest podcast, link below if you want to check that out, we were talking about the Switch 2, and Carrie, aka the Fox, pointed out that Nintendo says all games are not going to be compatible on the Switch 2. Now, most of us thought about that, and we said, well, that means Labo and Ring Fit, and that's perfectly reasonable. Those games use the Joy-Cons, and the new Joy-Cons won't fit into things that the old Joy-Cons would fit into, if that makes sense. But if the old Joy-Cons work on the new system wirelessly, connect via Bluetooth, then that really wouldn't be an issue. So I'm thinking that we won't see compatibility, because if we were going to have compatibility, then all of the games for the Switch 1 would work on the Switch 2. This is something you don't really run into on PC handhelds. They're just compatible with everything, and that's because they're just a PC, and it's just a better experience because of that. I also really hope that Nintendo figures out the scalping situation. I want them to do it the way that Valve did it, or the way that Apple does it, where you just order your system, and then when it's ready, they ship it to you. None of this bullshit where I'm going to Best Buy's website every day only to be beaten to the punch by a bunch of psychic robots that can buy everything instantaneously and then resell it on eBay for crazy prices. Nintendo has projected that they will have enough for 20 million units in the first year, which sounds great. But the Switch sold 15 million in its first year. And yes, 20 million is more, but I still worry about being able to get your hands on one of these things. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching, and check out this video next. Stay rad.